You are listening to the I Choose My Best Life podcast with Dr. Saundra Dalton-Smith, a show that is dedicated to helping you live fully, love boldly, and rest intentionally. For additional resources, visit ichoosemybestlife.com.
If you are feeling overwhelmed and in need of a break, I want to invite you on an experience like no other. This is our very first Rest and Renew cruise. It is happening January 16th through the 20th, 2025, aboard a luxurious, beautiful ship with Royal Caribbean. Imagine yourself sailing through turquoise waters with nothing but relaxation on the schedule. This isn't just a vacation. This is a water-bound rest retreat where you get an opportunity to reclaim your peace, enjoy worship sessions, inspiring workshops, and the delicious cuisine and locations that you'll experience on our adventure together. You get to indulge in some restorative activities based on the type of rest that you personally need to restore your body, mind, and spirit. Spaces are limited, so make sure you book your cabin now. You get the opportunity to choose if you want to have a private room or if you want to have a double room and share with your friends. We have all of this set up within our online system so you can secure your spot today before we close down registration on September 1st, 2024. So to get signed up, check out the link that is over in the show notes. And I can't wait to see you on the Rest and Renew cruise. Welcome, everyone. This is Dr. Saundra, and you're listening to I Choose My Best Life. Today, we're going to be helping out the parents with kids in college, as well as those who have kids in high school who may not be aware of the amount of kids that are having experiences with drugs at a young age and how this is escalating oftentimes during that pivotal time when they are moving over into those college years. I have with me today family recovery coach, author, speaker, and parent, Darryl Rodgers, who's going to help us be able to take a look at what are some of the things we need to be aware of? What are some of the warning signs? What are some things as a parent we can do to help support our child if we find out that they are going through a substance abuse issue? So I want to start by welcoming you, Darryl, and really giving you a moment just to tell us a little bit about how did you even get into an interest in this field? What is your personal connection to it?
Yes, going back a little bit, my background is in aviation. I started out as a pilot many years ago, and I had an older brother who was a pilot and was inspired by what he was doing. He was really when my oldest son, we have two boys, 7 years apart, and our oldest son, Chase, died in a marijuana-impaired wreck in 2014 after he struggled for about a year and a half with substance use disorder. And so after he died, I really did not understand anything about addiction. I wanted to understand it. What were the causes? How can I help other people who are going through this, particularly parents and other family members who are struggling with a loved one battling addiction? What can I do to help them? And that's what led me down this path into the work that I do now.
I certainly hate hearing about your son, and I'm thankful that through all of that, you've able to find a way of really honoring his life and supporting others who are going through, other parents and families who are going through a similar situation. Now, I know a little bit before the show started, we were having a bit of a conversation, and you'd stated that some of this started as early as when his sophomore year of high school. How were there warning signs, or how did you even know, or did you know something was going on at that time?
Yeah, I definitely saw warning signs at that time. I still can't say for sure exactly when he started. I think he started experimenting about that time. He told his mother later that he did not use until somewhere in his junior or senior year of high school. When they're going through that, they're not always going to be 100% honest with you. And I did see a lot of signs. Particularly, he was failing a subject. He had never been a straight A student, but his grades were always average or above average. And now all of a sudden, all of his grades were dropping. He was failing a subject for the first time ever. There was a change in the way he was dressing, the way he was carrying himself. He was becoming more rebellious at home. He'd always been an easygoing, laid back kid. So I'm seeing all these changes in his behavior. Seemed like he was associated with different people at school. He was in athletics. He did run track or participate in track, and also played football, high school football. And he continued on with that. That wasn't really suffering that I'd noticed. But all of these changes, sudden changes in his behavior, and it was really the middle of his junior year that he transferred to a military school with my urging. I was trying to figure out how to get a grip on this. He had been diagnosed ADHD early on, and that had never been a huge problem for him. It was mostly a little bit of focus issues in the classroom. Occasionally, you would see some hyperactivity, but not a huge issue. But I do feel like there's a correlation there with some of the substance use, because I noticed that a lot of kids, especially boys who've been diagnosed ADHD, end up later developing a substance use problem. Yeah, he dropped out. He transferred to the military school and improved his grades there and graduated. And a lot of things happened there, but he did end up going to college. He played football while he was at the military school, had a really good senior year of football, and he did go to like a Division II school on a football scholarship.
And I know from your history and for some of the things that I've read about your journey with Chase, that during that time, that freshman year, which I know, having children myself and having a son who is going into his freshman year this year and one who is now going into his junior year. I remember my oldest son, when he was starting his freshman year, drugs was a real issue. My son was really open about talking about, Mom, my roommate is like doing all sorts of stuff. There's paraphernalia all over the room. There's all these things going on. I don't think parents are as aware as how prevalent this is and how
Yeah.
many kids struggle with it. And just hearing him talk, it was a real battle, really, for him just to try to function in that type of environment because it
Yeah.
was so prevalent. What's a parent to do?
Yeah, it's not easy. I'll tell you, it's not easy. And having worked with parents over the past really almost 10 years in one form or another with this issue, struggling with this issue, I can tell you're right that it's been a problem for a while, but there's been an uptick in recent years. And even high school campuses, a lot of drugs on high school campuses and college campuses now. And some children, I think that talking to kids about drugs, that needs to really start at the middle school level. Some of them have already been exposed to that at the middle school level, by early on in middle school. As far as prevention goes, I think parents, first of all, they need to take it seriously and realize just how serious the threat is, and really have those talks early with their kids about having an out. Number one, how do the drugs work? A story can go a long ways, like a story like mine. You have to, depending on the age of the child, you have to tame it down a little bit, because my story is the story Chase is really it's a hard story for kids to hear. A lot of really bad things happen there. But they do need to hear the stories a little bit of the kinds of things that can happen. And then they need a little bit of the science, but they just need parents. First of all, I think parents have to really set a tone as their kids are going through that transition stage while they're in the preteen and teen years, or really beginning the earliest stages of transitioning into adulthood. And they really need to set a tone with them where the kids will feel comfortable coming to them to talk to them about things. If I could do one thing different, I think that would be it. My Chase would go to my wife with issues. He would be afraid to come and talk to me about it. I have a military background. I was the disciplinarian, and so he would go to his mom. And I had a good relationship with Chase. I think it would have been good had he felt more comfortable coming to me to talk about things. But certainly equipping kids with an out, because they're going to face peer pressure. You can role play. If someone comes to you and says, "Hey, do you want to go to this party? Hey, do you want to use this drug?" Having already role played that so that they have an out, because every kid's going to be a little bit different in how they approach that. Some will be really strong and have no problem saying no, where others may be a little more quiet, easygoing. They need a different strategy.
Oh, there's so much wisdom in that. And I think most parents probably have not done role playing with their child for
Right.
some of these situations that they are going to face. And I think that's might be the hardest thing, because you're in the middle of the situation as a 18, 19, whatever, young adult, and you haven't had the experience of thinking through that process of what am I going to do if this were to happen. We do those
Mhm.
things. What do you do if your tire goes flat on the road? We do it in so many other situations, but we leave out some of those key conversations that we know they're gonna face. I don't care what kind of college your child goes to. I don't care how you raise them up. As I mentioned with my son, it was one of those situations where the school required every freshman to live on campus, and you got roommates, and you don't get to pick your
Mhm.
roommates. So your child is gonna get exposed to people who maybe as a teen, you had more control over who they were hanging out with and some
Mhm.
of those kind of things, and you're not gonna have that. So they really have to grow up and understand some of those things. As you work with parents as a family recovery coach, and share a little bit more about even what that means as we go further, I'm curious, when a child does get to that point where they are regularly using, whether it's a sophomore in high school or a sophomore in college, there are kids who are regularly using drugs, and oftentimes it's what they consider soft drugs now. So it's
Mhm.
marijuana or some of these other things that are out there that are not like fentanyl. So they feel like, oh, it's not so bad. This is something I can do. How can a parent help a child who maybe doesn't even think it's something they need to stop?
I'm glad you brought that up. That's a really good question, because the landscape has really changed over the past even 5 years, but going back 10, 15 years, it's changed a lot. And yeah, you have drugs like fentanyl out there, and it can wind up accidentally most of the time, I think,
Mhm.
in other drugs. So a kid could smoke some marijuana and there's some fentanyl that ended up in the marijuana, because the drug dealers handling different drugs. So sometimes there's some cross contamination that happens there. Um, but so it's a much more dangerous landscape now than it used to be. And even the marijuana was Chase's biggest issue. He was addicted to marijuana, and I do see kids get addicted now. So I think when they detect that there's an issue, they need to really get on top of it right away, because most parents tend to take the marijuana issue far too lightly. When I was back in the late 70s, early 80s, when I was in high school, the marijuana, the THC, which is the psychoactive ingredient in marijuana, was about a 2 to 3% concentration. And it remained that way up until about the mid 90s. And the people who grow the marijuana, they began to selectively breed it so that they could get higher and higher potency marijuana. But then even after that, they found different ways they can change it. For example, there's wax extracts like dabs and shatter and other forms where the THC concentrations are just astronomical. If they're smoking it now, if it's in that a smokable form, it's typically going to be around, I'm going to guess around 20%, 18 to 20%, maybe even a little bit higher, versus 2 to 3% back when I was a teenager. And the other forms like the waxes can be upwards of 60 all the way up to almost 100% THC content. It's very potent, and there's all sorts of, now that we're beginning to see a lot more psychosis related to it. It's called cannabis-induced psychosis. They're beginning to see other things like cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome, and that's a tough one to say, but it's a very difficult gastro type of illness that affects these people who are using marijuana. It doesn't affect everyone. They can't really understand how it works exactly yet, but the only way they can get the nausea and all the stomach pains to stop is to cease use of any cannabis products. That increase in potency, along with that, plus all the other drugs that are more widely available and really potent out there now, is just, parents need to take all of it very seriously. And a lot of times, by the time they know there's a problem, it's been going on for a little while, because their child's usually going to try to conceal it, and they can be pretty good at doing that for a little while. So they really need to get on it fast.
Yeah, it's definitely another world compared to 30, 40 years ago when I was in high school
Yeah.
and college.
Yeah.
Even some of the things now I'm reading about with kids who are, and I'm probably going to say it wrong because I don't even 100% understand what they're doing, but something related to sniffing canisters of something that they can purchase,
Yeah.
like these canisters of stuff that they're sniffing to for some level of a high. I think one of the things that as a parent is that you can feel a little bit helpless in that situation when you
Yeah.
find out that your child is doing some of these things, regardless of the drug that they're using. I'm curious, when you're working with parents, is there a different approach if there's a child who's in high school, let's say, and living under your roof versus a child, and I probably shouldn't say child, young adult who is now out of your roof, maybe still on your bill in college, but you don't technically have your hands where you can really have a big effect on their life. How do you approach that with parents in those two different situations?
There is a much different approach. If you're dealing with a teenager, minor, you can say you have to go to treatment. And in most states, I think there may be some exceptions, but in most states, you say, hey, you have to go to treatment. They have to go to treatment. And you can really dictate that as a parent. And that all changes when they turn 18. It comes down to really setting healthy boundaries, because I have worked with parents and still do work with parents who have a 40-year-old or older, sometimes still living in their home, who's been using drugs since their teenage years or early 20s, and are still using drugs. They cannot hold down a job, and they're living at home with mom or dad or both together. And the parents sometimes feel like captives in their own home. It's just a really sad situation. If they're at home with you or if they're in college, you have to start looking at boundaries, because now you're dealing with an adult, and they may still be your child, but they're an adult. And so you have to start thinking more along the lines of, how would I treat another adult in this situation? And while you cannot dictate that they go to treatment or they get some type of care, you can begin to set those boundaries, and you really unify as a family around that. This is where parents really need to be, whether they're married or not, whether they're living under the same roof or not, the parents really need to be unified around the solution. And when I talk about setting boundaries, if a parent is paying for college, look, I've worked with parents, and this is just a quick example, but I've worked with parents who had a child who was in their final weeks of college, and they so desperately wanted him to graduate. And I completely understand that. He was so close. And yet the closer he got to graduation, the more he began to really self-destruct. He really needed to be pulled out of college and sent to a treatment program. But he dropped out just really a week or so away, and it ended up, he died of an overdose eventually, unfortunately. And there are things that are their life is more important than college. And if you're paying for their college or part of it, which you probably are, unless they have a full ride scholarship, you're paying for part of it, you can just say, we're not paying for this any longer. We'll help you pick the pieces back up later. But right now, you have to go to treatment, and you offer them that option. If they're living at home, it's the same sort of scenario. Maybe you don't start out with that. You can start out with the conversation of, hey, we would like to provide an option for you to go to treatment. And then if they refuse, you can say, well, you're going to need to pack your bags and move out because you're an adult now. And we can't have you using drugs in our home. Or maybe they're not using in the home, but most of the time they are. If they have an addiction, they're going to be using in your home. And I know of cases where the drug dealer shows up at the front door. Mom and dad don't even know that this child is using it. And the drug dealer showing up at the front door to get his money. Or there's a big argument out in the front yard. These are the kind of stories that I hear, and a lot more scary, that are a lot scarier than that. So I would just say you have to really take it seriously and don't play around with this, and set those hard boundaries that you need to, and be unified. And when they see that, more than likely they're going to choose the option for treatment. If they don't right away, they will later, but most of the times they'll choose it right then.
Yeah, I think those ultimatums are hard as a parent because, as you stated, you're like, oh, I want them to, whatever it is, graduate, whatever the thing is. You're wanting that for them, but you do have to look at the bigger picture, their health, their well-being, their longevity of life, and the things that are needed. So I know one of the things you state is that there is a big secret to recovery from addiction. What would you say is the big secret to recovery?
Yeah, and that's the family. That is the family. Really, it just comes down to the family, understanding addiction, getting some education on addiction, and understanding their proper role in the recovery process. And really, it comes down to staying in their lane a lot of times, because when you have again, it comes back down to, particularly when working with adult children, when the family is doing things for that adult child that they could be and should be doing for themselves. That's what we call enabling, or you could call it codependency. And when the parents do that, it's really robbing the child of the experience, that adult child of the experience that they need to have in order to mature, in order to grow into the person that they need to become. But fear becomes a big factor for families, because once the addiction is present and they realize the addiction is present, the fear takes over, and they're so scared. If I set healthy boundaries here, my child could end up, they won't speak to me again. It's going to sever the relationship, or they'll end up out on the street somewhere. I just can't bear the thought of my child out there living on the streets, or homeless, or dying of an overdose, or something along those lines. And that fear prevents them from setting and maintaining those healthy boundaries with their child. And when you have a child who's battling addiction, that addiction drives them to manipulate, to get their drug of choice. And most of the time, it is not something that they are consciously doing. It's not malicious. It's just that drug is driving them so hard that they're doing whatever they have to do, almost on autopilot, to get that drug. And so they will manipulate parents, and they will lie, they will cheat, they will steal, they will do whatever they have to do to get that drug. And it can be very destructive to the family unit. It can be dangerous, like I was mentioning before, in terms of like drug dealers showing up at the house, but they can go into a psychosis and tear up your home, or become physically violent. And I know those types of situations. That's where I really urge parents to do what they can to get that situation under control as quickly as possible, particularly when there are other younger siblings living in the home too, because you have to think about their welfare, not only from the standpoint of their older sibling who's using drugs may become violent and they may be injured or something, or they're bringing drug dealers to the home, or other people who are using drugs, but now they may be influenced by them. And now you have two children who are using drugs in your home, and that can happen so quickly. I think parents really have to be vigilant about this, and take it very seriously, and take action quickly when they see it coming.
We've been chatting with family recovery coach Darryl Rodgers. And I want to make sure that everyone knows how to get in touch with you, Darryl, to learn more about the services you offer, as well as about any programs that you may recommend or have that can help parents who find themselves in this situation.
Okay, there's several things. And I forgot to really mention this, but I also do interventions now. So if a family is in crisis, if they're in a crisis mode where they feel like their child's life is on the line and they're really in a tight situation, they can call me and set up an appointment and I can meet with them online. They can go to my website, thefamilyrecoverycoach.com. They can go to that website. There's a lot of information there, ways to get in touch with me through that website. They can also send me an email. That's D Rodgers, DRDGDRS 61 at hotmail.com. They can send me an email there and I'm happy to set up an appointment with them, I'll do the initial consultation call at no charge. And then once I've given an assessment, then we can set, if we want to, we can set up a time for another call. That's how I do that. But in terms of, I also have a peer support group for parents that's free of charge that they can attend. When I say I have it, I facilitate it. It's a group I've been facilitating for 7 years. We're online now, have been for a while, and it's called PAL, Parents of Addicted Loved Ones. They should be able to find a link on my website to register for the PAL meetings. Are every Monday night from 7 to 8:30 Eastern. And they can come in through a Zoom link. And it's a really good program. Like I said, hour and a half program. They get to meet other parents who are going through the same thing. There's a lot of collective wisdom and support there.
Excellent. And I'll share the links to your website as well as to the support group and some of your resources on your page as well. I think for a lot of parents, when you're going through something like this, you feel like, okay, who do I call? Because it's not like you can just open your phone book and find someone who really can help you automatically with that. We don't know where to look. And so to have someone who has walked through it, who has experience and expertise in it, and then to find other parents who are actually can be part of your support system, I think that's a huge part of the healing for most people.
Yeah, yeah. And I would like to mention one other thing really
Mhm.
quickly. I know this episode will probably come out sometime in August, and I'm putting together a summit, a virtual summit called the Family Recovery Summit. And I'm interviewing other professionals in the recovery, working in different various roles in the recovery field or treatment industry. And it's going to be a really good summit with a lot of experts from different areas. So that don't have a date yet, but I will send you the link hopefully before you're ready to publish this. And it will be in September. So probably early September is when that will come out.
Excellent. We'll share that as well. Until next time, everyone, live fully, love boldly, and rest intentionally.